It's one of those atmospheric evenings here on the North Norfolk coast. In other words, it's just pouring with rain. But that is precisely the sort of weather I look for when creating artwork. Well, I've had my water-soluble graphite pencils in action yet again, and that's basically the study, taken from my first view that is not that far from my cottage. In fact, it's out the front door. Well, hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Yesterday we just arrived here on the North Norfolk coast, Burnham Market, and we had a rather damp day but very atmospheric. So for those of you that have watched the beginning of the video, you'll see that I did a simple little pencil sketch on a very tiny pink pig sketching pad. And that is the sketch that I did, and I'm going to work to that. I can remember the sky, I can remember the feeling of the day, so really that's all I need. So I'm here in a lovely quiet surroundings, just on the patio, and I'm going to lead you through the painting process. Well, here we go then. That's the drawing on the board, and I'm going to use two brushes, maybe three, but I'm going to use the pointed mop brush number 4 and a very small rigger for the finer details. But other than that, not really much to do. Now, it was a very grey, wet, raining day. So how do we do a simple wet sky? Well, actually today I'm going to use ultramarine blue with burnt umber because I want a little bit of granulation. Now that will give you a lovely blue grey. There we go. And I'm going to use this as the overriding wash on the sky. I'm starting off with it, what looks particularly damp, but it's actually not really. And then as I come down, I'm just adding water, but I'm damping almost all of the paper, and I'm just adding more water because it's getting lighter as it heads towards the horizon. And I'm going to go right the way over the church with this. So that's really my first wash. The board is a bit of an angle, but not too much. But that's overall first wash onto the sky. Then in that lower area, I did notice a little bit of sort of pinkiness, which I'm going to streak in there like that. Now, it's only suggested like that. Now, I'm going to concentrate on the cloud shapes, the very dark cloud at the top, and all I'm going to do for that, I'm going to use ultramarine again with burnt umber, only this time a much stronger mix, a bit more burnt umber in there this time. We may be lucky enough to get a bit of granulation, and I'll explain that as we go. But when you're painting this sort of subject, paint up high and let it drag down, because it will fall considerably lower than you. I want it to finish somewhere about there, hoping that I'm successful with that. And then it's quite dark really all the way up the top here too. But I'm trying to design the sky to suit the landscape. And that's, as I quite often say, is what Constable did. He was a master at designing skies to suit landscapes. And I'm putting in some smaller clouds. There was one or two sort of smaller clouds here and there, just dotted around. And the lower you go down, the smaller the clouds would appear. and they can even go into the distance. There we are. Now, as I normally do, I'm going to go one tone darker. Well, that is very, very dark, but shall we? Let's try, see what happens. It will dry up a tone or two lighter, so let's not, you know, and without these dark clouds, particularly in that top left-hand corner, and don't spread the paint too much, it will spread itself, and that is the key to a good watercolour painting. You allow the paint to do its own thing. Now I'm just putting in one or two darker ones here, just in the lower area there, and may just darken that off a touch, and just a darker one there. There we go. But the rest just leave. Now I'm just letting them do their own thing. Just leave them to completely dry. While that's drying, I'm going to put in some colour into the field. Well, I'm starting off with raw sienna. Just pure, just diving straight in and just banging it on. Now look, it's even a little bit splashed into the top there. You may hear a bit of a noise, but that is purely the heating system for the accommodation. Right, there we go. Okay, now as we come into the foreground, I'm adding burnt umber. Not too much around the church, because I want that to remain reasonably light. Notice the crop markings that I've had a bit of burnt sienna too as I come into the foreground. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna into the cloud, because I want that to match the, look, pulling, that's what they call pulling the complete painting together. Then I'm going to add a little bit of that darker, what was in fact the cloud cover, to the foreground, making darker, give this atmosphere. See how the way I'm sweeping across the paper to get these lovely, now we're going blue again, quite blue there, look, looks hopefully that will look slightly damp. That's what I'm looking for, you know, Roland Hilda, a typical Roland Hilda feel to this. And now just before it dries, I'm going to sweep a bit of that in across there and a little bit across there. And that, I think, don't want to remove too much of this, a bit of burnt sienna there. There we are. Look at that. That burnt sienna attracts the eye. So don't be afraid to drop that in. Now all we really have to do, finish off, is to create the feeling running into the subject. And I'm going to do that with burnt umber, very, very strong, almost neat burnt umber. And if you put it in like that, don't put it in everywhere, just dot it around, and all of a sudden that foreground comes forward and the distance sits back. Be too large in the distance, just dot it around, but so long as you've got perspective there, that's the key to this. It's the perspective side of things that will in the end be the thing that gives you that real sense of interest. See the way the eye is now pulled through that atmospheric foreground towards the building and the church eventually. Now it may still be a little damp, so I'm using ultramarine almost on its own. Take a bit of moisture off the brush, because because I want just a little bit of that burnt umber in there, because what I want to do is create a feeling that perhaps there is a bit of depth. Don't think there's a great deal of tree work in the distance, but I think there could be a little of something going on. And then I'm going to slide across there with my raw sienna, and just in front of the building like that. It just gives like a hedge-like feel, I suppose. I suppose that's the way we could, it's what we could call it. Now, with this raw sienna, with a little bit of burnt sienna in there, I'm going to create the building. So it's going to be quite dark. Let's go burnt sienna with ultramarine, because this is going to be the dark wall of the building. There. That's lovely and dark. And of course, red tile roof. This is the only real red that I'm going to have in the complete scene. So now this is going to be really red. There we go. And that is a mix of light red and alizarin crimson. Right, now I'm just going to do the tower. May get a bit of running with this. Now the tower is going to be quite yellowy brown, so I'm using raw sienna with a little bit of burnt sienna in there, and I'm going to create just a little splash of light coming down that right hand side, just as if there is a bit of light there. But then quickly I'm going to put that dark sort of colour into the rest of it, and that will give you that little hint that something is, just remember the buttress, it's a round tower church, so that's the reason why it's showing up from light, medium, right, just got a glint of light on that, if that's a word, a glint. Then we're going very, very dark now, just dark brown. In actual fact, could add a bit more blue to that, because blue brown is not a bad thing to do. So you've got 3 tones there, and you put in the buttress work. Well, I can do it perhaps like that, just a little hint of it, and then this tone can then be the shadow underneath the overhanging building. Go. And that then get a bit of shadow, a bit of shade. And of course we have varying things going on in the background as regards the hedging. Maybe just a little bit of bright stuff here and there. It's not very bright. That is, we don't want too much that side. There we go. Bit of hedging. Bit as we go out into the distance. And a little bit this side, not too much. Just remove some of the paint. That's it. There we are. Now all of a sudden the church stands clearly against the lighter sky. Right, winter trees with a bit of atmosphere. Okay, let's set off on this one, shall we? What I've done, I've mixed a very strong mix, very little water in the brush. I've burnt sienna with a little bit of ultramarine, but to start with, I'm not using too much ultramarine and not too much paint. This wants to be, start off in the lower area, that's it. And this is quite a large, it's open tree. So we have varying sort of shapes to that. And it is a winter tree, so these are not the leaves. These are the branches, and it did overhang a bit in the lower area like that. And I'm just going to go in just with a bit of stronger colour, just to pull the eye towards the church. Now I'm putting a bit more ultramarine with that, not too much moisture. And let's do this one first, there we go. So where we have lots of colour, I'm adding very little colour. Where we have very little colour, I'm adding a lot of colour. Don't forget to leave gaps here and there. And this one on the outside edge needs muting. So plenty of blue in that. Not of any real substance, that. Interesting, but only holds in that left hand side. See? Look at that. All they need is branches. There's just, before we put those branches in, there's just one other tree that needs some attention, and that is a fir tree of some sort that stands there. And fir trees are quite easy to put in, really, and these do stand in the wild, so they're not absolutely perfect, but it is very dark, and that's what punctuates, and that justifies that shadow on the edge at the bottom there of the tower. So there we go, pretty easy. Just going to bang a bit of blue in that side first, just to ring the changes, and then some little touches of this blue here and there, just as a bit of extra interest. Good. Now we're going to do the tree branches. And for the tree branches, it's just ultramarine, damp the brush obviously, and I'm going to use burnt umber. It's a nice dark brown, don't be too brown, a bit more ultramarine. It's a lovely colour, ultramarine, for getting greys. There we are. And these need to be put in very simply. You've got to remember we've also got an ivy coming up that tree as well. Let's not be too strong with that. Let's put a bit of raw sienna with that, just to knock it back and to give it a slightly greeny colour. So that's that. Is ivy coming up there. So the trunk is quite wide actually, but don't completely paint in the complete trunk and branches all the way across the front of the tree, because for obvious reasons there is branches that are hanging in front. So you need to be, as I always say with trees, use a bit of restraint. So easy to get carried away with these sort of things. And we've got another tree coming up there, and these are of a lesser definition sort of tree. Just make so it doesn't come down too low. Just put one or two branches in here and there, dot them around, suggest it. Don't paint them, suggest them. Now I'm going to have one darker one there, just to as I always say, ring the changes a touch, because ringing the changes can quite often result in more interest. And another one there. Oh, and see that gap there of sky coming through? Lovely to have the branches hanging around that. Look at that. Then all of a sudden, before you know it, we have a lovely landscape as seen really yesterday in that rather inclement weather that we had here on the North Norfolk coast. And if you notice, I'm not making too much of these trees as I'm heading off, using a semi-dry brush now just to suggest branches. That's it. And there will be some little bits and bobs sticking up here and there of this darker colour. As I suggested before, you can always just wipe a bit away here and there, but there you have it. Just finally tidy up the church down that back edge there, and the belfry window, and two little touches here and there just to square up the top. Maybe one or two little touches of this darker colour here in the foreground, just to help give that bit of atmosphere. But personally, I think that more or less sums up quite well the day we had yesterday, which today is so much different. I mean, it's like chalk and cheese. It's lovely and sunny today. There we are. And I think that may do it. Just one other thing I may need to do. Just before I sign it, there is just one other thing I need to do. We need a bit of atmosphere here, where the eye is pulling across here. We've got to hold that in that side. So I'm adding that grey again, ultramarine and burnt umber. A bit more blue this time. Fairly weak, not too strong. Hopefully it's not too strong, but we're going to give it a go. Let's just rub it on that. That should be okay. A bit more blue. I'd prefer this to be more sort of grey than. There we go. There we are. That's what I'm looking for. A little bit of more atmosphere running across this field. Dropping in some little touches here. Don't want it too smooth along that edge. And one or two little touches there. These are my finishing touches that will make a big difference to the overall feel of it. But overall, I think that probably does it. Two little images of roughness in the field. There we go. Just sneaking across. Tell you what I'll do with those white areas. I'm going to put in burnt sienna into those white areas. Just to give it just that added bit of warmth. It looked a bit cold, and that is pretty much that. I'm just going to sign it up now. Just before I do sign it up, I'm going to put a couple of dark sort of birds somewhere. Now where I've got a feeling one could go there, like that. and one could go there. There we go. And where am I going to sign it? Let's sign it here. Let's go in this dark paint. Let's have a dark red. Let's use cadmium red for this. I don't know why, but it's a paint and I'm painting fairly well in with the name, because not quite sure when it gets mounted where the mount will come, so it may be about there. There you have it, St Margaret's Church on the outskirts of Burnham Market on a grey day. Well, I do hope you've enjoyed watching me paint this lovely little view, simple little scene, using a pencil sketch as a guide. If you have enjoyed this, then, you know, get your paints out, have a go. And stay tuned to my YouTube channel, Colinsteedart, Colinsteedartist on YouTube. And please subscribe if you've not already done so. And we'll see you again very shortly with more of these painting trips to Norfolk. Thank you for watching. In other words, it's just pouring with rain. But that is precisely the sort of weather I look for when creating artwork.